The three sons of Corin Prime beat down mercilessly on the sprawling marketplace, turning the red sand into a furnace beneath Captain Joran Vex's worn boots. The air shimmered with heat waves and the acrid smell of burning spice oil from countless food stalls. Joran pulled his weathered cap lower over his eyes, navigating through the chaos of alien merchants hawking everything from stolen starship parts to exotic creatures in energy cages. His cargo freighter, the Void Runner, needed new plasma coils, and Corin Prime was the only place in 3 sectors where he could find them without asking too many questions. The planet existed in a legal gray zone, perfect for traders who preferred to avoid imperial customs. Joran had been flying these routes for 15 years, ever since the war ended and left him with nothing but a ship and a desire to stay invisible. The marketplace was a riot of colors and sounds. 6 armed Krillian merchants argued loudly over a shipment of rare metals, while their translator droids buzzed frantically between them. A group of human colonists examined mechanical farming equipment with the desperate intensity of people betting their lives on their next harvest. Street performers juggled balls of pure energy, while children of a dozen species watched in wonder. Joren found the parts dealer he was looking for in a cramped stall filled with salvaged components. It's the proprietor, a bug-eyed Zilonian named Vrak, greeted him with the enthusiasm of someone who knew a regular customer when he saw one. Captain Vex. Perfect timing. I have exactly what you need. Vrak's multiple arms gestured toward a collection of gleaming plasma coils, fresh from a decommissioned cruiser. Top quality, very reasonable price. The negotiation was brief and professional. Joran had dealt with Vrak before and knew the Zilonian's prices were fair, even if his goods were not always acquired through legal channels. As credits changed hands, Joran felt the familiar satisfaction of a simple transaction completed. Number, complications, no emotional attachments, just business. He was securing the coils in his equipment pack when a commotion erupted from a nearby stall. A crowd had gathered around a large, greasy alien merchant who was shouting in broken galactic standard. Joran's first instinct was to ignore it and head back to his ship. But something about the scene made him pause. The merchant was a hut-like creature with mottled brown skin and multiple chins that wobbled as he spoke. He was gesturing dramatically at something behind the crowd, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone making a sales pitch. Curiosity overrode caution, and Joran found himself pushing through the onlookers to see what was causing such excitement. What he saw made his blood run cold. Chained to a metal post behind the merchant was a young alien female, her wrists and ankles bound with energy shackles that hummed with barely contained power. She was humanoid in shape, but clearly not human, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the harsh sunlight. Her hair was white as starlight and strange crystalline. Formations grew from her temples like a natural crown. Despite her obvious exhaustion and the bruises that marked her exposed arms, she held herself with a dignity that made the chain seem like a temporary inconvenience rather than a defeat. Crude sign in multiple languages hung around her neck. Thief, lifetime servitude. Inquire within. The merchant, who introduced himself as Blaba the Vast, was explaining her crimes to the gathered crowd. I caught her stealing energy crystals from my warehouse. Very valuable crystals. According to Corin law, theft is punishable by servitude. But I am generous merchant. For right price, I transfer her debt to you. She worked very hard, very strong, very ... decorative. The crowd laughed at his crude joke, but Joran felt sick. He had seen slavery before, had even been forced to turn a blind eye to it during the war. But something about this particular injustice cut through his carefully maintained emotional armor. The alien woman's eyes swept over the crowd with a mixture of defiance and resignation. And when her gaze briefly met his, he saw something that reminded him of his own reflection after particularly dark nights. What did she steal? Asked a gruff human traitor. Blobber's expression grew smug. Single energy crystal. Small one. But theft is theft, and law is law. 1 crystal. A lifetime of slavery for 1 crystal. The injustice was so absurd it was almost laughable, except that nothing about this situation was funny. Joran found himself stepping forward before his rational mind could stop him. "I want to see the crystal," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. Blobba's small eyes narrowed as he studied this new potential customer. Crystal is evidence. Already submitted to Port Authority, but value was 300 credits. Very expensive crystal. 300 credits. Joran had more than that in his ship's emergency fund. It was money he had saved for exactly this kind of unexpected expense, though he had never imagined using it for something like this. "How much for her debt?" he asked. The question sent a murmur through the crowd. Blobba's expression shifted from suspicious to calculating. "Ah, you have good eye, human. She is prime specimen, healthy, strong, young. Such quality costs 15,000 credits. 15,000, nearly everything Joran had saved over the past 2 years, was insane. It was financial suicide. It was exactly the kind of emotional decision that had gotten him into trouble before. 5,000, he countered. Blobba laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "You insult me. Look at her. Perfect condition, rare species, very exotic." "Malnourished and exhausted," Joran replied coldly. "And stealing food isn't exactly a resume highlight for a servant." 7,000.
Right.
The haggling continued for 20 minutes, with Joran using every negotiation trick he had learned in 15 years of trading. He pointed out the alien's obvious weakness: the legal complications of owning a slave, the cost of feeding and housing her. All the while, he was acutely aware of her watching him with those strange, luminous eyes. Finally, they settled on 10,000 credits, a sum that would leave Joran nearly broke, but not quite destitute. As he authorized the transfer from his ship's account, he wondered if he had lost his mind. What was he going to do with a slave? He had barely enough room on his ship for himself, let alone a passenger. Blobba produced a control device and deactivated the energy shackles with obvious reluctance. They fell to the ground with a heavy thud, leaving red marks on the alien's wrists and ankles. She rubbed her wrists slowly, never taking her eyes off Joran. "Congratulations," Blobba said with an oil-slick smile. "You now own Nissa of the Crystalline Worlds. She is your property to do with as you please. But remember, if she causes trouble, it is your responsibility." Joran stared at the alien woman, Nissa, and felt the weight of what he had just done settle on his shoulders. He had bought another person. The thought made him sick, but he had done it, and now he had to live with the consequences. "You're free," he said quietly, his words meant for her alone. "I'm not your owner. You can go wherever you want." Nissa tilted her head, studying him with an expression of confusion and something that might have been hope. When she spoke, her voice was soft and melodious, despite the exhaustion that lined her features. "Where would I go?" she asked. "I have no ship, no credits, no family. This world is hostile to my kind." It was a good question, and Joran did not have a good answer. He looked around the marketplace, at the vendors and customers who had already lost interest in the spectacle and returned to their business. Corin Prime was indeed hostile to anyone without money or connections, and he had just freed someone who had neither. "I have a ship," he said finally. "If you need passage somewhere, I can take you." Something flickered in her crystalline eyes, a spark of life that had been nearly extinguished. "Accept your offer, Captain, but I have nothing to pay you with." "Consider it a gift," he replied, though he was already calculating how much this act of charity was going to cost him in the long run. As they walked through the marketplace toward the landing pad where the Void Runner waited, Joran found himself stealing glances at his unexpected passenger. There was something about her that seemed familiar, though he was certain he had never met her species before. The crystalline formations on her temples caught the light in fascinating ways, and despite her obvious exhaustion, she moved with a grace that suggested hidden strength. "Captain," she said as they approached his ship, "may I ask why you freed me?" It was a question he had been asking himself since the moment he had stepped forward in the crowd. He could have given her a dozen different answers, all of them partially true, but in the end, he settled on the simplest one, because it was the right thing to do. She stopped walking and turned to face him fully. In the harsh light of the three suns, her blue skin seemed to glow with an inner radiance, and the crystalline formations on her temples pulsed with a soft light. "Perhaps fate brought us together, Captain Vex, for I have something that might interest you. Something that could change both our lives forever." As they boarded the Void Runner, Joran had no idea that his simple act of compassion just set in motion events that would reshape the galaxy itself. The Void Runner's cramped living quarters had never felt smaller than they did with Nissa. Aboard, Joran watched her move through the narrow corridors with fluid grace, her crystalline formations catching and reflecting the ship's dim lighting in mesmerizing patterns. She had cleaned herself up in the small refresher, and now her pale blue skin had regained some of its luminous quality. Though the exhaustion in her eyes remained, they had been in hyperspace for 6 hours, heading toward the neutral trading station at Nexus Point, where Joran hoped to find Nissa's safe passage to wherever she wanted to go. But every time he asked about her destination, she gave him the same cryptic answer: "That depends on whether you are willing to listen to an impossible story." Finally, as they sat across from each other in the ship's tiny galley sharing a meal of reconstituted protein and processed vegetables, Joran's curiosity got the better of him. "All right," he said, setting down his fork. "Tell me this impossible story." Nissa's luminous eyes studied his face for a long moment, as if she were trying to read something written there. The crystalline formations on her temples began to pulse, with a soft, rhythmic light that seemed to match her heartbeat. "People, the Carathi, were the guardians of something your species calls the Genesis Engine," she began, her melodious voice taking on a formal, almost ritualistic tone. "For 10,000 years, we protected it from those who would use its power for destruction." Joran leaned back in his chair, trying to keep his expression neutral. The Genesis Engine was a legend, a mythical artifact that supposedly could terraform entire worlds in a matter of days. Every treasure hunter, explorer, and corporate expedition in the galaxy had searched for it at one time or another. None had ever found so much as a fragment. "The engine is real," Nissa continued, apparently reading his skepticism. "I know because I am bonded to it. My crystalline formations are not merely decorative. They are organic sensors, attuned to the engine's quantum signature. I can feel its presence across star systems like a song only I can hear." She paused, her hand unconsciously moving to touch one of the crystal growths on her temple. 3 months ago, that song changed. It became desperate, urgent. The engine was calling to me, warning me that it had been discovered. "By who?" Joran asked, despite himself becoming drawn into her story. "The Calyx Consortium," she replied, and her voice carried a weight of bitter hatred. "They found the hidden world where my people had concealed the engine, killed everyone who tried to stop them, turned my home into a mining operation. I was the only survivor, and only because I was off-world when they attacked." Joran had heard of the Calyx Consortium. They were a megacorporation that specialized in aggressive resource acquisition, which was corporate speak for theft and murder on a galactic scale. If they had found the Genesis Engine, it would explain why they had been so ruthlessly efficient. In eliminating the Carathi, I stole the energy crystal to power a communication device, Nissa continued. "I was trying to send a warning to the Republic to anyone who would listen, but I was caught before I could complete the transmission." "And now?" Joran asked. "Now the engine is incomplete?" "The consortium has the main device, but they are missing the control matrix. Without it, the engine is useless, just another piece of ancient technology." Her eyes met his across the small table. "I know where the control matrix is hidden. My people foresaw this day and prepared for it." Before Joran could respond, the ship's proximity alarms began blaring. Emergency lights bathed the galley, pulsing red, and the artificial gravity fluctuated as the Void Runner was yanked out of hyperspace by an interdiction field. "What's happening?" Nissa asked, her crystalline formations now blazing with alarmed light. Joran was already moving, racing toward the cockpit with Nissa close behind. The main display showed 3 sleek black ships surrounding them, their hull designs unlike anything in the standard ship databases. They were predators, built for speed and violence, and they had appeared out of nowhere. This is Overseer Calix of the Consortium Vessel Dominator. A cold voice crackled over the communications. System, you are harboring stolen property. Surrender the Kyrithi female immediately, and you will be permitted to continue your journey. Joran's hands flew over the controls, bringing the ship's defensive systems online. The Void Runner was not a warship, but years of operating in dangerous space had taught him the value of being prepared for trouble. I don't know what you're talking about, he replied, trying to buy time while he calculated their options. Do not test my patience, Captain Vex, Calix replied, and the fact that he knew Joran's name sent a chill down his spine. Our sensors have already confirmed the presence of Kyrithi biosignatures aboard your vessel. You have 30 seconds to comply. Nisa placed a hand on Joran's shoulder, her touch surprisingly warm despite her alien nature. You do not have to do this, she said quietly. I will go with them. You have already done more than enough. Like hell, Joran muttered, his fingers dancing over the navigation controls. Hold on. The Void Runner suddenly accelerated, diving toward the nearby asteroid field that had been their original destination. The consortium ships immediately gave chase, their superior speed quickly closing the distance. Laser fire erupted around them, turning chunks of asteroids into glowing debris. This is madness, Nissa said, but there was admiration in her voice. They will destroy us. Not if we reach the shattered zone, Joran replied, piloting the ship through a gap between two massive asteroids that would have been impossible for the larger consortium vessels to navigate. There's something in that field that makes sensors go crazy. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them. The chase continued for 20 minutes, with the Void Runner using its smaller size and Joran's superior piloting skills to stay ahead of their pursuers. But the consortium ships were relentless. Their weapons were slowly wearing down the freighter's shields. It was then that Nisa did something extraordinary. She closed her eyes and placed both hands on the ship's sensor array, her crystalline formations blazing with brilliant light. Suddenly, the ship's navigation system began displaying information that should have been impossible to obtain. There, she said, pointing to a specific asteroid on the display. That one is hollow. There's a passage through it that leads to the other side of the field. Joran stared at the display, then at Nisa. How do you know that? The crystals, she replied. They can sense the quantum fluctuations in matter. It's how my people navigated space before we developed technological sensors. Without hesitation, Joran angled the ship toward the asteroid Nissa had indicated. The passage was barely wide enough for the Void Runner, and flying through it at high speed in the middle of a battle was either brilliant or suicidal. Possibly both. They emerged on the far side of the asteroid field to find empty space ahead. Of them, the consortium ships, unable to follow through the narrow passage, had been forced to go around the long way. It would take them at least an hour to catch up. Where to now? Joran asked. Nissa was quiet for a long moment, her crystalline formations pulsing with a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The control matrix is hidden on Viridian 7, in the ruins of an ancient temple. But Captain, you must understand what you are choosing to do. The consortium will never stop hunting us. They will send entire fleets if necessary. Joran thought about his simple life as a cargo hauler, the peaceful anonymity he had cultivated since the war ended. All of that was gone now, destroyed the moment he had decided to buy a slave's freedom in an alien marketplace. Then we better get there first, he said, inputting the coordinates for Viridian 7. As the Void Runner jumped back into hyperspace, Nissa moved closer to him in the cockpit. Why are you doing this? She asked. You could have let them take me. You could have returned to your old life. Joran stared out at the swirling tunnel of hyperspace, thinking about her question. The honest answer was that he was not entirely sure himself. Maybe it was because he was tired of running from his past. Maybe it was because he recognized something in her that reminded him of his own lost purpose. Maybe it was simply because, for the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. Because some things are worth fighting for, he said finally. And maybe it's time I remembered that. Nissa smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness he had seen from her. Then we have a chance, she said. The temple on Viridian 7, is not just a hiding place. It's a test. The control matrix will only reveal itself to those who prove they are worthy guardians. What kind of test? The kind that requires two people working together, she replied. One with the technological knowledge to understand the ancient systems, and one with the biological connection to communicate with them. Joran felt a strange sense of rightness settle over him. Whatever lay ahead on Viridian 7, he knew they would face it together. The lonely cargo hauler and the last guardian of a lost civilization. United by chance and choice in a cause that could determine the fate of the galaxy. Behind them, in the depths of space, Overseer Calyx watched the Void Runner's hyperspace signature fade from his sensors. His cold eyes showed no emotion as he activated his communications array. "Bring the fleet," he ordered. "It's time to end this." Viridian 7 hung in space like a jewel, its emerald surface swirled with silver clouds that sparkled in the light of its binary suns. From orbit, it looked peaceful, almost inviting, but Joran knew better than to trust appearances. According to the star charts, this world had been uninhabited for over 1,000 years, abandoned after some ecological disaster that had turned most of its surface into a poisonous wasteland. "The temple is on the northern continent, Nisa," said her crystalline formations glowing as she studied the planet below. "I can feel the control matrix calling to me, but there's something else. Something ancient and powerful that's been sleeping for a very long time." Joran guided the Void Runner through the upper atmosphere, following the coordinates Nissa provided. The northern continent was a stark contrast to the lush equatorial regions they had passed over. Here, the landscape was dominated by towering spires of black stone and deep canyons that cut through the earth like scars. At the heart of it all, rising from a circular valley, was a structure that defied easy description. The temple was not built so much as grown, its organic curves and flowing lines suggesting that it had been shaped by some process beyond conventional construction. It was made of the same crystalline material as Nissa's formations, and it pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light that seemed to match her heartbeat. "My people built this," she said softly. 10,000 years ago, when we first discovered the Genesis engine, it was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where the engine's power could be studied and protected. They landed in a clearing near the temple's base, and Joran immediately noticed something wrong with the readings on his instruments. The air outside was breathable, which should have been impossible given the planet's supposed toxicity. More disturbing, his sensors were detecting massive energy signatures coming from deep within the temple. "The stories about this world being poisoned," he said as they prepared to leave the ship. "They were lies, weren't they?" Nissa nodded grimly. "My people spread those stories to keep treasure hunters away. But if the consortium has found this place, then our deception has failed." They equipped themselves with basic exploration gear and stepped out into the alien landscape. The air was surprisingly fresh, carrying the scent of ozone and something floral that Joran could not identify. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of wind through the crystal formations. The temple's entrance was sealed by a barrier of pure energy. As they approached, Nissa's crystalline formations began to resonate with the structure. The barrier recognized her and dissolved, revealing a corridor that stretched into the depths of the building. "Stay close," she warned. "The temple's defenses are still active. It will test us before it allows us to reach the control matrix." They had walked for perhaps 10 minutes when the first test began. The corridor suddenly split into dozens of different paths, each one leading in a different direction. There were no markings, no clues about which way to go, just an endless maze of identical passages. "A navigation puzzle," Joran observed. "But how do we solve it?" Nissa closed her eyes and placed her hands on the nearest wall. Her crystalline formations flared with light, and suddenly the temple around them seemed to come alive. Patterns of energy flowed through the walls, creating a map that only she could read. "This way," she said, leading him down a passage that looked identical to all the others. "The temple is testing our connection to each other. I can sense the path, but I need you to interpret the technical aspects of what we're seeing." They moved deeper into the temple, past chambers filled with holographic displays showing the history of the Kyrithi people. Joran saw images of their civilization at its height, worlds transformed by the Genesis engine into paradises of crystal and light. He saw the arrival of the consortium's black ships, the desperate last stand of the Guardians, and the final decision to scatter the engine's components across the galaxy. "Your people were peaceful," he observed. "We were," Nyssa replied sadly. "We believed that the engine's power was meant to create, not destroy. We never imagined that others would see it as a weapon." The second test came in the form of a massive chamber filled with floating platforms connected by bridges of pure energy. The platforms were constantly moving, shifting in complex patterns that seemed to follow some mathematical formula. A wrong step would mean falling into an abyss that glowed with dangerous radiation. "I can calculate the pattern," Joran said, studying the movement of the platforms. "But you'll need to guide us across. My sensors can't penetrate the energy fields." Working together, they navigated the treacherous course. Joran called out the timing and direction of each jump, while Nyssa used her connection to the temple. To sense the safe paths was a dance of trust and precision, and by the time they reached the far side of the chamber, they were both breathing heavily. The third and final test was the most personal. They entered a circular chamber where the walls showed not holograms, but actual memories. Joran saw himself as a young officer in the Republic Navy, filled with idealism and hope. He saw the battles that had slowly worn away his faith in the because he served, the friends he had lost, the civilians he had failed to save. "The temple is showing us our past," Nyssa said, her own memories playing out on the walls around them. "It needs to understand who we are before it will trust us with the control matrix." Joran watched scenes from his life he had tried to forget. Moments of cowardice and heroism, love and loss. He saw the decision to leave the Navy after the war, the years of drifting from job to job, the gradual withdrawal from anything that might require him to care about someone else. "I ran away," he said quietly. "After the war, I couldn't handle the responsibility anymore. I just wanted to be left alone." "And I ran too," Nyssa replied, her own painful memories surrounding them. "When the consortium attacked my world, could have stayed and fought. Instead, I fled and let my people die." The memories continued to flow around them, but now they began to change. The temple was showing them not just their failures, but their choices. Joran saw himself buying Nyssa's freedom, not because he was a hero, but because he was a man who had decided to stop running. He saw Nyssa choosing to trust him with the location of the control matrix. Not because she was desperate, but because she recognized in him someone who might be worthy of her people's legacy. "We are both broken," Nyssa said, reaching out to take his hand. "But perhaps that is what makes us strong enough to bear this burden." The memories faded, and the chamber's center began to glow with brilliant light. Rising from the floor was a crystalline structure that seemed to contain the captured essence of a star. It was beautiful and terrible, a device that could reshape worlds or destroy them. "Oh, the control matrix," Nyssa whispered. "With this, the Genesis engine can be properly activated or properly destroyed." Joran stared at the device, feeling the weight of what they had discovered. "What do we do with it?" Before Nyssa could answer, the chamber's walls exploded inward. Armed figures in black armor poured through the breach, their weapons trained on the two companions. Leading them was a tall man with cold eyes and a face that seemed carved from stone. "Overseer Calix," Nyssa said, her voice filled with hatred. "The last guardian," Calix replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "Their pet human. You have led us on quite a chase, but it ends here." "You're too late," Joran said, moving protectively. In front of Nyssa, control matrix is protected by the temple's defenses. "You can't take it." Expression devoid of warmth. "Watch me." He raised a device that looked like a twisted version of the temple's own crystalline technology. When he activated it, the chamber's energy fields flickered and died. The temple's defenses, overwhelmed by the alien technology, began to shut down. "Kyrithi, biotechnology," Calix explained. "Taken from the corpses of your people, seems. Their own essence can be turned against their creations." Nyssa let out a cry of anguish, her crystalline formations blazing with fury. "You desecrated their bodies." "I used them," Calix replied coldly. just as I will use you. The control matrix requires a living Kirathi to operate. You will serve that purpose, willingly or not. The consortium soldiers advanced, but Joran stepped forward, placing himself between them and Nisa. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. Gladly, Calix said, drawing his sidearm. The shot rang out, echoing through the chamber. Joran felt the burning impact in his chest, felt himself falling. But as he hit the ground, he saw something that gave him hope. Nisa's crystalline formations were not just glowing now. They were singing a harmony that resonated through the temple's structure. No, Calix shouted, recognizing what was happening. Stop her, but it was too late. Nisa had made her choice. Instead of allowing the control matrix to fall into the consortium's hands, she was using her connection to the temple to activate its final defense. The walls began to glow with increasing intensity, and the ancient structure started to collapse. In on itself, the temple is designed to self-destruct if the control matrix is threatened. She called out to Joran, her voice barely audible over the growing harmonic resonance. But there's an escape route. The chamber beneath us leads to an underground river. Joran, fighting against the pain in his chest, managed to activate the small explosive charges he had brought as emergency equipment. The floor of the chamber cracked and gave way, revealing the dark water below. As the temple began its final collapse, he grabbed Nisa, and they fell together into the rushing current. They emerged from the underground river system several kilometers away, both battered and exhausted. The temple was gone, reduced to rubble and crystal dust. With it, the control matrix had been destroyed, ensuring that the Genesis engine would remain incomplete and useless. It's over, Nisa said, cradling Joran's wounded form. The engine is safe. What about us? Joran asked, feeling his strength. Fading. I have medical supplies on your ship, she replied. And then we disappear. The consortium will never stop hunting us, but without the control matrix, their search is pointless. As they made their way back to the Void Runner, Joran realized that his old life as a solitary cargo hauler was truly over. But looking at Nisa, seeing the strength and determination in her luminous eyes, he found that he did not mind. We're both refugees now, exiles from their former lives, but they had each other. Where will we go? He asked. Wherever the stars take us, she replied. Together. The Void Runner lifted off from Viridian 7 for the last time, carrying its crew toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Behind them, the ruins of the temple gradually sank beneath the planet's surface, taking with them the last traces of an ancient civilization's greatest achievement. In the vast emptiness of space, two unlikely companions began their new life together. Bound by sacrifice, choice, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories come not from what we gain, but from what we choose to give up,